Coming home from a deployment always felt like stepping into a dream. The air was different here, fresher, lighter, but something felt off. As I pulled into the driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that this homecoming wasn't like the others. Amanda and I had been married for almost 5 years. She was my anchor through the craziness of Army life, always waiting for me with that warm smile, her arms open wide when I walked through the door. But this time, when I stepped inside, the house felt colder, emptier. The usual excitement in her eyes wasn't there. I chalked it up to her being busy or stressed. Being married to a soldier wasn't easy, after all. But deep down, I knew something was different. Amanda greeted me at the door, kissed my cheek, and gave me a quick hug, but it was hurried, almost forced. There was no lingering embrace, no joyful reunion. Instead, she mumbled something about being late for work, grabbed her purse, and rushed out the door, leaving me standing there in the hallway, alone. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe she had something important to do. Maybe it was just bad timing. But as the days passed, the feeling that something was wrong only grew stronger. She seemed distracted all the time, always glued to her phone or coming up with excuses to be out of the house. She worked long hours, longer than I remembered. Her weekends, which we used to spend together, suddenly became filled with activities she couldn't really explain. Then, the neighbors started talking. I didn't want to believe it at first, who would? But the comments were hard to ignore. Mrs. Howard, the elderly woman from next door, casually mentioned seeing Amanda at the store with Robert, our neighbor who lived just down the street. They looked real cozy, she said with a knowing smile. I tried to laugh it off, but it felt like someone had punched me in the gut. Robert was 55, older than me by a good 20 years. What could she possibly see in him? I brushed it aside as gossip, but then I started noticing things myself. Amanda would disappear for hours on end, and when I asked her where she'd been, she'd come up with vague excuses. Just running errands, she'd say with a half-hearted smile. Meeting a friend. But when I pressed for details, her answers didn't make sense. There were little signs, two small things that didn't add up. Her phone, always face down when she put it on the table. Her wardrobe seemed to change overnight, clothes that I had never seen before. Outfits far too fancy for running errands or casual dinners. And there was the perfume. She started wearing a new scent, something sweet and strong that lingered in the air long after she left the room. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I'd been away for a while and was just imagining things. But the doubt was there, gnawing at me. I tried to talk to her, tried to reconnect, but every time I reached out, she seemed to pull away. Our conversations were shallow, surface level. It was like she was keeping me at arm's length, and I didn't know why. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. We were sitting on the couch watching TV, but she was barely paying attention, more interested in her phone than in me. I reached over, gently placing my hand on hers. "Amanda, is everything okay?" I asked, my voice softer than I felt. "You've been acting a little distant lately." She looked up, startled, as if she hadn't even realized I was sitting next to her. "What?" "Oh yeah, I'm fine," she said quickly, her eyes darting back to the screen. "Just a lot going on at work, you know?" But I didn't know. I didn't know anything anymore. Something was wrong, and she was shutting me out. The next morning, I bumped into a neighbor, Dave, while I was out for a jog. He was standing in his driveway, sipping coffee, and as I passed by, he waved me over. "Hey, haven't seen you around much," he said with a grin. "How's leave treating you?" "Not bad," I replied, trying to sound upbeat. "Just glad to be home." "Well, I'm sure Amanda's glad to have you back, right?" Dave's grin faded slightly, and there was a hint of something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place. "Yeah, I guess," I said slowly, sensing that there was more to the conversation. Dave shifted on his feet, glancing around before lowering his voice. "Look, man, I don't want to get in your business, but I've seen Amanda around a lot lately. With Robert." That punch to the gut feeling came back, but I kept my face neutral. "Robert?" "Yeah, you know, the older guy down the block. They've been spending a lot of time together." I just thought, well, maybe it's nothing, but you might want to check in on that. I forced a smile and nodded, thanking him before jogging off. My heart was pounding, not from the run, but from the storm of thoughts swirling in my head. Could it really be true? Amanda and Robert? No, it didn't make sense. He was old enough to be her father. But then again, her behavior lately, the long hours, the phone always hidden, the new clothes, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was definitely wrong, and the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by sitting around and pretending everything was fine. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Amanda sleeping soundly beside me. I could hear her breathing, slow and steady, as if she didn't have a care in the world. But my mind was racing, filled with questions that I couldn't ask her. Not yet. I had to know for sure. There was no other way. Tomorrow, I would start finding out the truth. The day after my conversation with Dave, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled deep in my chest. It was like a dark cloud following me, growing larger with each passing moment. My mind was racing, jumping from one thought to another, trying to make sense of Amanda's behavior. I needed answers. I needed to know if the woman I married was betraying me with Robert. That morning, I sat across from Amanda at the breakfast table, watching her closely as she scrolled through her phone. Her face was lit by the screen, her expression unreadable, but there was a subtle shift in her mood when she saw me looking. She quickly turned her phone face down, just like she'd been doing more and more lately. "How's work?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She glanced up briefly, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Busy. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. That was the problem. It felt like I didn't know anything anymore. "I've been thinking," I continued, keeping my voice steady. "Maybe we should take a trip somewhere. Just the two of us. Get away for a bit." Amanda paused, her fork hovering over her plate. "A trip? Now?" She sounded surprised, almost suspicious. "I mean, work is kind of hectic right now. I don't think I can take time off." Her response was exactly what I expected but hoped not to hear. She was always coming up with excuses these days, always avoiding spending time with me. I nodded, pretending to understand, but deep down, the doubt gnawed at me. Later that day, while she was at work, I found myself pacing the house, my thoughts spiraling out of control. I couldn't just sit around and wonder anymore. I had to do something. I grabbed my phone and did a quick search. Private investigators. It felt extreme, but if she was hiding something, I needed proof. The call was brief. The investigator, a man named Jim, asked me a few questions about Amanda's behavior, and I told him everything: her distant attitude, the time spent with Robert, the phone that never left her side. He listened carefully, then reassured me that he'd get to the bottom of it. "Give me a couple of days," he said. "I'll keep a close watch on her. You'll know soon enough." That night, I sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, barely paying attention to whatever show Amanda had on. She was curled up on the other end of the couch, her phone in hand, texting furiously. I couldn't help but wonder who she was messaging. Was it Robert? Was she arranging another secret meeting? "Who are you texting?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Amanda didn't look up. "Just some friends from work." It was always friends from work or just catching up. Nothing ever felt real or honest anymore. The next day, I waited anxiously for Jim's update. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart skipped a beat. But it wasn't until late afternoon that I finally got a message from him. "We need to talk. Call me when you can." My stomach twisted in knots as I dialed his number. Jim picked up on the second ring. "I followed her today," he began, his voice calm and professional. "She left the house around noon and went straight to Robert's. They were together for a couple of hours, and then they went out for lunch at a cafe downtown. From what I could see, it looked intimate." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Intimate. It was the confirmation I didn't want but knew was coming. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing, trying to process what he was telling me. "They didn't do anything overtly inappropriate in public," Jim continued, "but their body language, laughing, touching, was enough to raise suspicion. I'll keep tailing her. Let's see if we can catch something more concrete." After I hung up, I sat there, staring at the wall, my thoughts a chaotic mess. Amanda was cheating on me. There was no more denying it. All the little signs, all the excuses, they weren't just in my head. They were real. She was betraying me with a man old enough to be her father, and I couldn't understand why. Over the next few days, Jim kept me updated. Each report was another blow to my chest, another piece of evidence that shattered whatever hope I had left. Amanda was spending more and more time with Robert. They met at his house, at cafes, and even at a hotel on the edge of town. It was all too much to handle, but I couldn't confront her yet. I needed more. I needed to catch her in the act. One evening, as I sat alone in the darkened living room, I heard the familiar sound of Amanda's car pulling into the driveway. She walked in, her face flushed, and I noticed that same sweet perfume she'd been wearing lately, the one she never wore for me. "How was your day?" I asked, forcing a smile as she set her purse down. "Busy," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Work was crazy." "Really?" I said, my voice steady but laced with suspicion. "Because Jim saw you at a cafe today." "With Robert." She froze for a moment, her eyes wide. It was the first time I'd mentioned Robert by name, and I could see the panic flash across her face before she quickly masked it. "Oh, that," she said with a forced laugh. "Yeah, Robert and I had lunch. He's been helping me with some stuff at work, so we just grabbed a bite." "Nothing weird." "Nothing weird?" My jaw clenched as I struggled to keep my cool. I wanted to call her out, to demand to know why she was lying to my face. But I held back. I wasn't ready for that confrontation, not yet. "I'm sure," I said quietly, watching her closely as she slipped past me and disappeared into the bedroom. The next morning, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to know for sure. Jim had given me enough evidence, but something inside me refused to believe it until I witnessed it myself. I told Amanda I had to go into work early, even though my leave wasn't over. She barely seemed to care, offering a half-hearted goodbye before I left. I drove to a nearby park and waited, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. An hour later, I saw Amanda leave the house. She wasn't going to work. She was going to him. I followed her at a distance, my heart pounding in my chest. She drove straight to Robert's house, like she had done so many times before. But this time, I parked down the street, hidden behind a row of trees, and watched. Minutes later, they both emerged from the house. They were laughing, their arms brushing against each other, and I saw the way Robert looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. They got into his car and drove off. I followed them all the way to a restaurant on the outskirts of town, where they sat together, sharing a bottle of wine, looking for all the world like a couple in love. It was one thing to hear about it, another thing entirely to see it. There they were, Amanda and Robert, sitting together like it was the most natural thing in the world, as if I didn't exist, as if our marriage meant nothing. I watched them from a distance, my stomach churning with anger and heartbreak. This was it. There was no more denying it, no more excuses. Amanda was having an affair with Robert, and I had the proof I needed. Now, it was time to confront her with the truth. I sat in my car, parked at the edge of the restaurant lot, staring through the windshield at Amanda and Robert. Every laugh, every casual touch, made my blood boil. They sat there like they didn't have a care in the world, as if nothing they were doing was wrong. But the way Robert leaned in, his eyes lingering on her in a way no friend would, confirmed what I already knew. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. The urge to storm in there and confront them was almost overwhelming, but I wasn't ready for that, not yet. I needed more. I needed undeniable proof that Amanda couldn't wriggle out of with her usual lies. I watched them for nearly 2 hours as they talked and smiled, sharing what looked like an intimate, romantic lunch. My heart pounded in my chest, a sickening mix of anger and disbelief making it hard to breathe. When they finally stood up and left, I followed them at a safe distance as they drove out of town. I couldn't believe my eyes when they pulled into a small hotel. They didn't even bother to hide it. They parked in the back, out of sight, and I watched from a distance as they walked into the lobby together. This was my confirmation, my proof. It wasn't just lunch. It was a full-blown affair, right there in front of me. All the doubt, all the second-guessing, vanished. The truth was undeniable now, but I still needed more. I needed to catch them in the act. I parked my car a few streets away and walked toward the hotel, my heart pounding with each step. Part of me didn't want to do this, didn't want to see the truth staring me in the face. But another part of me, angry, betrayed, and desperate, needed to see it. to know for sure. I reached the hotel, slipped inside, and found the front desk. The receptionist barely glanced at me as I asked for a room number, pretending I was meeting a friend. Amanda and Robert had already gone upstairs, so it wasn't hard to figure out where they were. After a short conversation, a small bribe, and a bit of luck, I got the information I needed. Room 312. The number burned into my mind as I climbed the stairs, feeling like I was walking to the gallows. Each step felt heavier than the last, my breath shallow and quick. What was I going to do when I got there? I didn't even know. All I knew was that I had to see it with my own eyes. When I reached the third floor, I moved quietly down the hallway, my eyes scanning the numbers on the doors until I found 312. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the number, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The sound of muffled voices drifted through the door, laughter, murmurs. My stomach turned. I knew what was happening on the other side. I leaned in closer, my ear pressed against the door. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. Amanda's voice, soft and playful. Robert's low chuckle. They were together, and they weren't just talking. My blood boiled, the betrayal coursing through me like poison. For a few moments, I stood there, trying to decide what to do. I could burst in and catch them right there, or I could walk away, leaving them to their deceit. My mind raced, torn between fury and the need for a clear plan. In the end, I stepped back, not ready for a full confrontation. Not yet. I wanted Amanda to feel the weight of her lies when I had all the evidence I needed. I left the hotel, the rage simmering beneath my skin. I drove back to the house, every second filled with images of them together, laughing, touching, betraying me. When I got home, I paced the living room, unable to sit still, waiting for Amanda to come back. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew one thing: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That night, Amanda came home late, her smile too bright, too fake. I watched her closely as she walked through the door, pretending nothing was wrong, pretending she wasn't stabbing me in the back. "How was your day?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Long," she replied with a sigh, tossing her purse on the counter. "Work was exhausting. I'm going to take a shower." "Work?" I nearly laughed out loud. She didn't even bother to come up with a new lie. The image of her at that hotel, walking into that room with Robert, flashed in my mind, and it took everything in me to keep my face neutral. I couldn't confront her yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I nodded and watched as she disappeared into the bathroom. The moment she closed the door, I pulled out my phone and texted Jim. He responded quickly, agreeing to meet me the next day with the full report. The next morning, I met Jim at a diner downtown. He handed me a folder, thick with photos and documents. I opened it, my heart pounding as I flipped through the pictures of Amanda and Robert at the cafe, walking into the hotel, laughing together like they didn't have a care in the world. "It's all there," Jim said quietly. "You've got more than enough proof now." I nodded, unable to take my eyes off the photos. Every image was like a dagger to the heart, but I couldn't look away. This was what I needed. This was the proof that would end all the lies, all the excuses. But even with the evidence in hand, I couldn't stop myself from following them one last time. I needed to see it through to the end, to catch them in the act with my own eyes. So I told Amanda I was going to work, just like before, and I left the house. But instead of going to work, I parked my car a few blocks away and waited. Sure enough, within the hour, Amanda left the house. She wasn't heading to work. She was heading to Robert's place, like she had done so many times before. I followed them again, my pulse racing, and this time, they didn't even bother with the hotel. They went straight back to our house. I parked down the street and crept toward the house, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what I was going to find, but it didn't make it any easier. As I approached the front window, I peered inside, my stomach churning. There they were, in the living room, wrapped up in each other like they didn't have a care in the world. On my couch in my house. This was it. There was no more waiting, no more hesitation. I had everything I needed, and now it was time to confront her. I stormed up to the front door, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I threw the door open, and they both jumped, their faces frozen in shock. Enjoying yourselves? I asked, my voice cold and calm, though every nerve in my body was on fire. Amanda's eyes widened, her face pale as she scrambled to come up with an excuse. But there was nothing she could say. I had seen it all. I had the proof. And now, I had the final confrontation. This was the moment I had been dreading and waiting for. There was no turning back now. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding as I stared at Amanda and Robert, frozen in shock. They both jumped up from the couch, their faces a mixture of panic and guilt. It was as if time had stopped for a moment, the three of us caught in a silent, suffocating web of betrayal. John, it's not what it looks like, Amanda stammered, her voice shaky, her eyes wide with fear. She took a step toward me, but I held up my hand, stopping her in her tracks. Don't, I said coldly. Don't insult my intelligence. Robert, who had been sitting there like a deer caught in headlights, finally found his voice. Look, man, I think we should talk about this. It's not what you think, he said, his voice dripping with nervous charm, as if he thought he could talk his way out of it. He stood up, his hands raised in some pathetic attempt to calm the situation. I took a step inside, closing the door behind me. The sound of it shutting echoed through the room like a final, ominous seal of fate. You think you can explain this away? What are you doing in my house? On my couch? Amanda's face went white, and she looked between me and Robert, her mind clearly scrambling for an explanation that wouldn't come. John, please. I know. I interrupted, my voice sharp and cold. I know everything, Amanda. The lunches, the hotels, the sneaking around like you thought I wouldn't notice. You've been lying to me for months. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She knew there was no point in denying it. The weight of her betrayal was hanging in the air like a toxic cloud, suffocating us both. John, it's not serious. It's not, she began, her voice trembling. Not serious? I snapped, my hands clenching into fists. I could feel the anger boiling beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. You've been seeing him behind my back, in my own house. How long, Amanda? How long have you been lying to me? Robert, sensing the rising tension, took a step forward, trying to insert himself into the conversation. It's been a mistake, okay? Let's just calm down and talk this through. I turned on him, my anger now fully directed at the man who had so casually inserted himself into my life. Talk this through? You've been messing around with my wife, Robert. My wife. What exactly do you think we need to talk about? He backed up, his hands still raised, as if I was going to swing at him at any moment. The truth was, I wanted to. The thought of hitting him, of making him feel just a fraction of the pain he'd caused me, was almost overwhelming. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of thinking this was just about him. This is my fault, Amanda blurted out, her voice shaking. She stepped between us, her hands up as if to shield Robert from my fury. John, I made a mistake. I never meant for it to go this far. I stared at her, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and sorrow. You never meant for it to go this far? You've been lying to me for months, Amanda. You've been sneaking around, making me think I was going crazy, all while you were with him. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the betrayal was too fresh, too raw. I couldn't let myself feel anything but anger. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You succeeded. For a moment, the room fell into silence. Amanda stood there, her face pale, tears spilling down her cheeks. Robert, now clearly uncomfortable, shifted awkwardly, looking like he wanted to bolt for the door. I almost wished he would. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside me. This was it. This was the moment I'd been dreading, but also the moment I had been building toward for weeks. I had the proof. I had caught them red-handed, and now I had to decide what came next. I don't care about your excuses, I said finally, my voice low and steady. I don't care about how you feel, Amanda. You've broken every ounce of trust we had. You've destroyed our marriage. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, John, please. I'm done, I said, cutting her off. I'm done with the lies, the sneaking around, all of it. You've made your choice, Amanda. Now you have to live with it. Robert, clearly seeing where this was heading, spoke up again. Look, man, I get it. You're angry, but maybe we can. You need to leave, I said, my voice sharp and final. Now. He hesitated, glancing at Amanda as if he expected her to back him up. But she didn't say anything. She just stood there, her face buried in her hands, sobbing quietly. Finally, Robert gave a small nod and backed toward the door. All right, I'll go, he said, his voice quiet, almost ashamed. He opened the door and slipped out, leaving me alone with Amanda. As soon as the door clicked shut behind him, Amanda collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. John, I'm so sorry, she choked out between gasps for air. Please, please don't leave me. I made a mistake, I know, but I'll do anything to make it right. I stood there, staring at her, the weight of everything crashing down on me. This was the woman I had loved, the woman I had married, the woman I thought I would spend the rest of my life with. And now, she was a stranger, someone who had lied to me, betrayed me, and shattered the life we had built together. I don't know who you are anymore, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. The Amanda I knew would never do this. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I'm still me, John. I'm still the woman you fell in love with. No, you're not, I said, shaking my head. The woman I fell in love with wouldn't have lied to me like this. She wouldn't have destroyed everything we had. Amanda's sobs grew louder, her body trembling with the force of it. Please, John, please. Don't leave me. We can fix this. I know we can. I stared down at her, my heart heavy with the weight of her words. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that somehow we could put this behind us and move forward. But the other part of me, the part that had seen her with Robert, that had listened to her lies for weeks, knew that it was impossible. There's no fixing this, Amanda, I said softly, the finality of the words hitting both of us like a slap. You've broken us. Her face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands again, her sobs filling the room. I turned away, the sight of her too painful to bear. I couldn't stay here. Not with her. Not after everything she had done. I walked to the door, my mind a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I had thought that catching her in the act would bring me some sort of closure, some satisfaction, but it didn't. All it did was rip open a wound that I wasn't sure would ever heal. As I opened the door to leave, Amanda's voice stopped me. John, what do I do now? I paused, my hand on the doorknob, not turning around to face her. I don't know, Amanda, I said quietly. That's something you're going to have to figure out. And with that, I walked out of the house, leaving behind the woman I once loved and the life we had built together. The betrayal, the lies, the deceit, it was all too much to bear. There was no going back now. When I left the house that day, I thought walking away would bring me peace. I thought that leaving Amanda sobbing on the couch would be the end of it, that I could shut the door on everything and never look back. But as the days went by, I realized that the confrontation had barely scratched the surface. The anger was still there, bubbling just beneath the surface, and the lies Amanda had spun were still wrapped tightly around me. My mind kept replaying everything, the look on her face when I caught them, the pathetic excuses she tried to make, the way Robert had slunk out of the house like a guilty teenager. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him. It haunted me. I thought I could move on, that walking away from Amanda would bring closure. But instead, I was left with questions. How long had this been going on? Why Robert? What had I missed? I couldn't let it go. I needed answers. I needed the truth, even if I wasn't sure I could handle it. So, I did something I wasn't proud of. I called Amanda. I told her we needed to talk, that I wanted to hear her side. It wasn't about forgiving her, I knew I could never do that, but I wanted to hear her version of the story, to piece together the lies she had told and understand how it had all fallen apart. We met at a cafe downtown, a neutral place where we wouldn't be surrounded by memories of our life together. When I walked in, Amanda was already sitting at a table by the window, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked small and fragile, a far cry from the confident, vibrant woman I had married. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence hung heavy between us, thick with unspoken words and unfinished arguments. Finally, Amanda broke the silence. "Thank you for meeting me," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond. I just stared at her, waiting for her to explain herself. "I know I messed up," she continued, her hands trembling as she clutched her coffee cup. "I know I hurt you, and I hate myself for it." "Why?" I asked, my voice hard and cold. "Why did you do it, Amanda? What was missing in our marriage that made you turn to him?" She flinched at the directness of the question, her eyes darting down to the table. "It wasn't like that," she mumbled, her voice shaking. "It wasn't about you, John. It was, I don't know. I was confused." I clenched my jaw, fighting to keep my emotions in check. "Confused? That's your excuse?" Amanda shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "No, it's not an excuse. I don't have an excuse. I don't even know how it started, but I never meant for it to get this far." She winced, her face crumpling as she started to cry. But her tears didn't move me this time. I was done feeling sorry for her. "I'm sorry, John," she whispered, wiping at her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you." "You didn't think about hurting me when you were with him," I shot back. "You didn't care about me when you were lying to my face every day, making me believe everything was fine." Amanda shook her head, her hands trembling as she set her coffee cup down. "I was selfish. I know that now. I got caught up in something that I couldn't stop." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest as I stared at her. "So, was it? Was it excitement? Was Robert some kind of thrill that I couldn't give you?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It wasn't about excitement or anything like that. I don't even know why I did it. Robert and I. It just happened." I couldn't help but laugh, the bitterness in my chest rising to the surface. "It just happened? That's your explanation? You tripped and fell into an affair?" Amanda's face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I don't know what you want me to say," she choked out. "I'm sorry, John. I'm so sorry." For a moment, I just sat there, watching her cry, feeling the familiar mix of anger and sorrow twist inside me. I wanted to believe her, wanted to think that maybe there was some part of our marriage that could still be salvaged. But the truth was, I didn't know if I could ever forgive her. The lies had dug too deep, the betrayal too fresh. "You don't know why you did it," I said quietly, shaking my head. "But you kept doing it, over and over again." Amanda looked up at me, her eyes swollen and desperate. "I'll do anything to make it right," she whispered. "Anything. Just, please, don't leave me. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can—" "I don't think you understand," I interrupted, my voice steady but cold. "There's nothing left to fix. You've broken everything." Her face crumpled again, and she sobbed harder, her hands clutching at the edge of the table as if she could hold on to the last fragments of our marriage. But it was already gone, shattered beyond repair. "I'm done, Amanda," I said, standing up. "This isn't something we can come back from." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, her expression pleading. "Please, John, don't do this." But there was no going back. I had made up my mind. The lies, the betrayal, it was too much. I couldn't stay in a marriage built on deceit. "I'm filing for divorce," I said quietly, watching as the words hit her like a physical blow. "It's over." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stay to listen. I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind. As I stepped out into the cold air, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't the kind of relief that came with closure or peace, but it was something. It was the first step toward moving on, toward leaving the lies and betrayal behind. But even as I walked away, a part of me knew that the scars from Amanda's lies would stay with me for a long time. This wasn't something I could easily forget, no matter how much distance I put between us. I had confronted her, heard her excuses, and seen the tears, but none of it could erase what she had done. And as much as I wanted answers, I realized that knowing the truth didn't make the pain any less real. It was over. Our marriage was over, and there was no turning back. As I walked out of the cafe, leaving Amanda behind, a part of me felt hollow. The anger and hurt I'd carried for weeks had been laid bare, but I still wasn't free of it. The confrontation didn't bring closure, and her tears didn't wash away the betrayal. For the first few days after I told Amanda I wanted a divorce, I stayed in a hotel, avoiding the house and everything connected to her. I couldn't face the place where our marriage had fallen apart, where I had caught her with Robert. I thought about leaving the town altogether, disappearing like a ghost. But something kept me anchored here, an unfinished sense of justice. Or maybe it was just the need for revenge. I couldn't get the image of Amanda and Robert together out of my head. It played on a loop in my mind, like a nightmare I couldn't escape. The betrayal felt too raw, too deep to let go. I wanted Amanda to feel the same pain, the same humiliation I had felt when I caught her in the act. She had destroyed our marriage with her lies, and I wasn't going to walk away quietly. That's when I remembered Victoria. Victoria was Amanda's younger sister, a model who had always turned heads wherever she went. She was striking, with long dark hair, flawless skin, and a body that seemed sculpted for attention. Amanda had always been a bit jealous of Victoria's looks, though she would never admit it. Growing up in her sister's shadow had left Amanda with a chip on her shoulder, even though she would laugh it off when anyone brought it up. Victoria had been in and out of town over the years, and we had always gotten along. In fact, I had always felt there was an unspoken attraction between us, though I never acted on it. But now, the idea of turning to Victoria felt like the perfect way to take my revenge. I reached out to Victoria through a casual text, something simple. "Hey, you in town? Would love to catch up." It was easier than I expected. I had half expected her to brush me off, but she seemed eager to meet up. Part of me wondered if she had always harbored some interest, or maybe she was just curious. Either way, I didn't care. I had a plan, and I was going to see it through. We met at a bar downtown, one of those dimly lit places where no one asks questions and no one cares who's sitting with whom. When I walked in, Victoria was already seated at a table, looking effortlessly stunning as always. She smiled when she saw me, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered Amanda, her lies, her betrayal, and the guilt disappeared. "John." Victoria greeted me with a warm hug, her perfume filling the air. "It's been too long. How have you been?" I smiled, keeping my voice casual. "Yeah, it has been. I've been better, honestly. Things with your sister haven't exactly worked out." She raised an eyebrow, her expression turning sympathetic. "I heard. Amanda told me about the divorce." "I'm really sorry." I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "It is what it is. I'm just trying to move on." Victoria gave me a long look, her eyes searching mine. "You deserve better than that, John. I've always thought that." There it was. The door had opened, and I wasn't going to let the opportunity slip away. We spent the evening laughing and talking about anything but Amanda. I made sure to steer the conversation toward lighter topics, keeping the mood flirty and fun. Victoria was easy to talk to, confident, witty, and, unlike Amanda, she didn't seem to carry any emotional baggage. By the end of the night, I had her smiling and leaning in closer, her hand resting on my arm more than once. I could tell she was interested, and I didn't have to push too hard to get her to agree to see me again. Over the next few days, Victoria and I started spending more time together. She seemed to enjoy my company, and it wasn't long before the attraction between us became undeniable. It was as if we were playing a game, both knowing where it was heading but not wanting to rush it. I didn't tell Amanda what was happening. She didn't need to know, at least. Not yet. But part of me was waiting for her to find out, waiting for the moment when she would see what I was doing. It wasn't just about being with Victoria. It was about making Amanda feel the sting of betrayal, just like I had. The night it finally happened, Victoria and I were alone at my hotel. We had just come back from dinner, and the tension between us had been building for days. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine, and I knew what she was thinking. This was the moment. I kissed her. It wasn't impulsive, it was calculated. And as our kiss deepened, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction settle over me. This wasn't about love. This wasn't about attraction. This was about revenge. Victoria didn't pull away. If anything, she leaned into the kiss, her hands resting on my chest as she responded. It felt almost surreal, like I was watching myself from a distance, knowing that what I was doing wasn't right, but not caring. We spent the night together, and though it wasn't the passionate affair that movies make it out to be, it didn't need to be. For me, it was about sending a message to Amanda that I wasn't the fool she thought I was, that I could hurt her just as deeply as she had hurt me. The next morning, I woke up next to Victoria, feeling both victorious and hollow. The revenge had been sweet, but it hadn't healed the wound that Amanda's betrayal had left behind. I knew it wouldn't, but a part of me had hoped that this would be the final blow that set me free. Victoria stirred beside me, smiling sleepily as she wrapped her arms around me. "Good morning," she whispered, her voice soft. For a moment, I lay there, wondering if this had been worth it. I had taken my revenge, sure, but at what cost? Was I any better than Amanda now? Later that day, the inevitable happened. Amanda found out. I hadn't told her directly, but word gets around, especially when it involves someone like Victoria. I received a call from Amanda while I was at work, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You're sleeping with my sister?" she spat, disbelief dripping from every word. I didn't flinch. "Yeah, I am." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she processed the shock. "How could you?" she finally whispered, her voice breaking. I couldn't help the cold smile that crept across my face. "How could I? Amanda, how could you? You think you get to cry about this after what you did?" She tried to respond, but her words came out jumbled, choked by sobs. I could hear the pain in her voice, and for the first time, I felt a twinge of satisfaction. She was feeling it now. The sting of betrayal, the humiliation I had felt. It didn't fix everything, but it felt like justice. "Amanda, we're done," I said firmly. "You wanted to wreck our marriage, so I'm moving on. You can cry all you want, but you don't get to play the victim." I hung up before she could respond, the weight of the conversation settling over me like a heavy fog. The revenge had been served, but instead of feeling triumphant, I felt empty. Victoria texted me later, asking when we could meet again. But for the first time, I hesitated. The revenge had been sweet, but it hadn't filled the void left by Amanda's betrayal. In the end, it hadn't brought the closure I thought it would. Revenge had its price, and I was beginning to wonder if I had paid too much. The days following my revenge on Amanda were a blur. After that last phone call where she finally realized I was with her sister, there was an eerie silence between us. She didn't call or text me again, and I didn't reach out either. It was as if we both knew that there was nothing left to say. The damage was done, and whatever we had before had been obliterated. I thought I'd feel more satisfied after hurting Amanda the way she hurt me. I thought watching her break down, hearing the disbelief in her voice, would bring me peace. But instead, all I felt was exhaustion. The anger I'd carried for weeks had burned itself out, leaving me hollow. Revenge hadn't healed the wound, if anything. It only made me realize how deep that wound really was. Victoria, on the other hand, was eager to keep things going between us. She texted me regularly, asking to meet up, but I found myself growing distant. What had started as a plan for vengeance didn't feel right anymore. I had used her, plain and simple. And now, every time I looked at her, I felt a pang of guilt that I couldn't shake. She didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of my anger toward Amanda. One evening, about a week after everything had gone down, I finally called Victoria. We hadn't spoken in a few days, and I knew I couldn't drag this out any longer. "Hey, John," she answered brightly, her voice full of warmth. "I've been waiting to hear from you. Want to grab dinner tomorrow?" I sighed, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. "Victoria, listen, I need to talk to you." Her tone shifted immediately. "What's wrong?" "I think we both know this isn't going anywhere," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What happened between us, it wasn't fair to you. I was angry with Amanda, and I used you to get back at her. That's not right, and I don't want to keep pretending it is." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, processing what I just said. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost resigned. I knew, John. I knew that's why you reached out to me. But I didn't care. I liked spending time with you. I liked spending time with you too, I admitted. But this isn't the right way to start something. You deserve better than being caught up in the mess between Amanda and me. Victoria was quiet again, and when she finally spoke, her voice was laced with sadness. I guess I knew this was coming. I just didn't want to admit it. I'm sorry, Victoria, I said, meaning it. I didn't want to hurt you. I'll be okay, she replied, though I could hear the disappointment in her voice. Take care of yourself, John. You too, I said before hanging up. I sat there for a while after the call, staring at my phone, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. Ending things with Victoria was the right thing to do, but it left me alone, with nothing but my thoughts to keep me company. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to really think about what had happened not just with Amanda, but with everything. My marriage had crumbled, and my attempt at revenge had done nothing to ease the pain. It was time to accept that the life I had with Amanda was over, and clinging to the past was only going to hurt me more. I needed to let go and figure out who I was without her. The next few weeks were about rebuilding. I moved out of the hotel and found a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom place with a view of the parking lot, but it felt like mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in a house filled with memories of a life that no longer existed. It was a blank slate, a chance to start over. I focused on work, throwing myself into projects that had been neglected while my personal life fell apart. The routine helped, giving me something to do, something to keep my mind from wandering back to the past. But even as I kept busy, there were quiet moments in the middle of the night when I still felt the weight of everything. The loneliness, the loss, the betrayal. It didn't just go away. I ran into Amanda a few times in the weeks after the divorce papers were finalized. She looked different, thinner, more fragile, as if the weight of what had happened had taken its toll on her too. We didn't speak much, just polite nods or awkward hellos when we crossed paths in town. I wondered if she regretted what she had done, but I didn't ask. I didn't need to know anymore. One day, as I sat in my apartment, sipping a beer and staring out the window, I realized that I didn't feel the same anger I once had. The resentment, the bitterness, it had started to fade. It wasn't that I had forgiven Amanda. I don't think I ever could, but I had moved past it. What she had done no longer defined me. I had survived the betrayal. I had made it through the worst of it. And now, it was time to focus on my own life. A life without Amanda. A life without the weight of revenge hanging over me. A few months later, I met someone new. Her name was Emily, and she wasn't anything like Amanda. She was kind, easygoing, and there was a lightness about her that made me feel like I could breathe again. We met by chance, just a casual introduction at a friend's barbecue, but there was something about her that drew me in. We took things slow, and I was careful not to let the past creep into what we were building. I didn't tell her much about Amanda or what had happened, not because I was hiding it, but because it felt like a chapter that no longer mattered. Emily wasn't a part of that story, and I didn't want her to be. As we spent more time together, I realized something that I hadn't expected: I could be happy again. The wounds Amanda had left were still there, but they weren't as raw anymore. They had started to heal, little by little, and Emily was helping me see that life could move forward. One evening, as Emily and I sat on the couch in my apartment, laughing over a movie, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Real, genuine peace. The kind that comes when you stop carrying the weight of the past and allow yourself to embrace the future. It wasn't a grand epiphany, no dramatic moment of realization. It was quiet, subtle, like a gentle breeze that swept over me and whispered, "You're going to be okay." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. This was my new beginning.